So last week I asked you guys about core ideas, what to do with these cores that I take out of my projects. And there was a lot of great ideas. I've had this one in the back of my mind now for quite some time. And I'm hoping that it's going to be something really neat. But I guess we'll see when we get there. But essentially what I'm going to do is take this core, put it upside down. And then I've already cut up a spacer. I'm going to glue that on there with some CA glue. And then I'm going to take this piece and put it on the top like so. And then this whole area will be filled with the Pro Series. Now the goal here is to have this thermal crack. And I mean, if it's got 1,000 thermal cracks in it, that's great. And if it doesn't have enough thermal cracking in it, maybe I'll take a hammer and give it some. So by using the Pro Series, you know, 1/2 inch max is the depth that it's supposed to be used at. That will cause this to thermal crack and give us hopefully all kinds of cracking. So first things first, what I'm going to do is glue this piece on here, and then I'm going to set that into our bucket, and we'll use the rice method to determine how much rice or how much volume we're going to need, because I'm only going to get one shot at this. Once we mix this up in the cups, it won't take long for it to thermally set. So having the right volume is crucial. Welcome to this week's video. I really do appreciate you stopping by to check out my videos each and every week. And I do upload every Fridays at 9 a.m. and I usually have a live chat function. So if you're able to join us at 9 a.m. Eastern, I'll be able to basically talk about the project as it's being made on TV. The first thing I gotta do is get the measurement of what the resin's going to be. I missed this in the end. I think it's just because I couldn't get enough volume underneath of the top piece. Well, I think that that's going to give us close to the level that we need. It's so tough to tell. Let's measure this up and see what it is. Wow, that's going to be a lot of Pro Series. So there's 2 liters. We'll call that 1 1/4. So 3 and 1/4 liters. Wow. If this doesn't thermal crack, I will be absolutely shocked. So when I clean these up prior to starting the video, I wanted them to be the bottom one, which this one is going to be, fit basically perfectly inside the bucket so it doesn't move around too much. A little bit of movement. And then that way when I put this one on, we'll have an even space around the outside, and there's already a center on the bottom here. So when it comes out of the casting, when it comes out of the bucket, hopefully when we put it between centers, it's going to be lined up properly, because there's one there. There, I'll leave that for about, I don't know, 10 minutes or so. Make sure that the glue is set up on it. And then we'll mix up some Pro Series. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to cover this is because epoxy has a shelf life of between 6 to 12 months, depending on the manufacturer. So, you know, I've thrown away some epoxy because it got too old on me. And I think that this is actually a perfect way to use up your old epoxy, especially if you're going to go for the thermal cracked kintsugi method, like you're going to see here later on. So that's the main reason why I want to shoot this. And I've been thinking about this for a long time. And it's kind of funny when I mentioned it to Gabe from Designer Epoxy, he was like, "What? You're going to do what?" So most times, as resin casters, you certainly don't want any thermal cracking. But in this case, because the Pro Series is really only meant to be poured 1/2 inch deep, with the depth of pour that we're going to get in this, I knew that it was going to thermal crack and thermal crack badly, and that's what I was looking for. So just showing the colors that I'm going for this week. The crystallized white, it was mainly just to give a little bit more sparkle within the casting, so that's why I use that. It would have been nice to see maybe some just straight up white in the casting, but it didn't really work out that way. All right, I'm just going to throw these in the clean room. Once I get up to about 45 degrees, we'll do the pour. All right, we're getting there. 41.2, so I got to get pouring this. I don't have a large area to pour, so it's going to be slow doing so. I'm just going to add these and make a big mess, I think. A larger pour area certainly would have been beneficial here. I just had that maybe about that 1/8 of an inch gap all the way around the outside of this. So anyway, I took my time and eventually I get it. Can't remember what I poured last. For some reason the blue is hotter than the rest of them. I don't know if it's got to do with the shape of the cup, possibly. And this is going to have that kind of peacock holoform-ish look. I'm hoping that I've mixed up enough. She's warm. Okay, I'm going to quickly mix up some purple, and then that way we can get this in the pressure pot. All right, this should do it. It's another 1.5 liters. I don't have the time to wait for it to set up, because if I do, I knew this was going to be messy, but man, it's really messy. This should drop down in there and combine so that we don't have just a purple part of the vase, but hey, if we do, I'm all right with that too. There, I think we're finally there. Jeez. All right, I gotta quickly get this in the pressure pot. And as you can see, some of the green squeezed up, so I think it's going to be fine. Anyway, I definitely want to get this in the pressure pot before it sets. Look, I assume that we'll be back here in about an hour, and we'll hopefully be able to do the gold. Yeah, it's quite warm. Well, it's the next day. It didn't work out the way I wanted to yesterday. Because, you know, like I want this to be full of cracks, but after an hour, the epoxy still hadn't set. It was really, really tacky. So I don't know how many more hours it would have taken for it to essentially fully cure. So I didn't want to pull it out of this and have some uncured epoxy, and it would have been a mess. So. I don't want to destroy this bucket, I like it. Once you find a good sized casting bucket that you like, it's tough to destroy it when you get trying to get out these castings out, but you know, sometimes it happens. But for the most part, I can save them usually, even with no mold release. Okay, interesting. There's a liquid in there, but it seems like it's water. How is that even possible? Did it steam off? Was it so hot that it actually did that? Wow. It's definitely water. That's neat. These cores are 100% dry. There's no way that they're not dry. But it looks like we've got some really good thermal cracking, which of course is what I was going for. Really deep cracks here. This is actually moved. I'm a little baffled by the water. I know that when I touched this yesterday, it was so hot I could barely put my hands on it. So, interesting. Very interesting. So what I'm going to do is blow down in these cracks to make sure that there's no standing water in there. And then we'll proceed to the next step here. But man, I'm thinking I'm going to love these colors. Little cathedrals. Cool. Doesn't look like there's any more. I don't know. It's just a thing. So I can't really use the same bucket to cast this again because it's just going to be too tight and it will restrict the resin from flowing down to fill in all of those cracks. So got out a bigger bucket, used the rice method. The rice is still packed pretty tight around it, but not tight enough that it will restrict the flow of the resin into the cracks. There, that should work. Let's mix up some resin. Figured I would stick with the Pro Series again. And when I was mixing up this amount, I was like, okay, this is probably going to be way too much an overkill. Surprisingly enough, there was a little bit sitting on the casting afterwards. But the main thing that I wanted to do here was mix this super, super strong. I wanted this to look 100% like gold. So it's really heavy pigmented with the pure gold. Looks like gold to me. Let's get out the vacuum chamber. I think the biggest key to success here was the fact that I used the vacuum chamber. Now if I had just put the epoxy on the top of this casting and then threw it in the pressure pot, I don't know if it would have pushed it all into those cracks. It may have, but with the combination of the vacuum chamber and the pressure pot, I set myself up for success, except for the odd little bit of epoxy dripping over the edge and making a mess. I'm going to fix this on this side or else the resin's going to keep dripping over the edge. So far we've lost very little of it, but sorry, I got my AC unit. It's hot in here, so got to get the AC unit going. All right, let's try this again. So as we watch this cycle on and off, you can see the bubbles coming out of it. You know, I tried to think of a way to hold that bag up, and I just really couldn't come up with anything. After I redid it, it's really not that big of a deal anymore. But it's certainly on occasion you'll see a little bit of resin drip over the edge, but other than that, this actually worked out very well, and I'm quite pleased with it. I cut a lot of footage out of here. Now the top tenon is exposed, so that tells me that, you know, this casting has really soaked up a lot of that epoxy, so that's exactly what I'm going for. And you know, there are some bubbles coming out, but for the most part it's not too bad. So that's been about an hour, and I'm really surprised to still see air coming out of here. Hopefully there's not a hole in one of the bags from the sharp resin. Yeah, I think I'm just going to release the vacuum. And I still want to get this in a pressure pot while the resin is still quite thin. And anyway, we'll see tomorrow exactly what we're dealing with. Still looks like there's a decent reservoir there. Anyway, I'll throw this in pressure pot. See you tomorrow. All right, it's the next day. See what kind of a mess we got ourselves into this time. I was a little worried that the plastic would fall down into the casting, so that's why I put a cable tie on the top of it when it went into the pressure pot. But we still got some resin on top, so that's good. Let's hope that all of our cracks are filled. Well, best I can tell, all the cracks are filled in. But I guess we'll find out once we get deep inside of this. But they all look like they're filled in, so that's outstanding. All right, let's clean off the top and the bottom, find our centers, and get it on the lathe. That'll do just fine. For the new people, I'm using the Hercules from the Hunter Tool Systems, the number 3, the largest one. Like I do with all of my resin castings, strip off the excess resin, get a good look at things. If things need to be recasted from that point, then of course I would do it then. But the goal is just to strip away the resin, the excess resin that's sitting on the top, and then make a decision as to what's going to be up and what's going to be down. Now we already know which is going to be down because that's the way it was planned. But in most cases, a lot of times I'll flip-flop and the top of the casting will be the bottom and vice versa. But anyway, once we get this resin stripped off, we'll get a look at this and we'll make a decision from there as to what the next step's going to be. You may or may not have noticed when I was mixing the colors that I mixed them really strong, and that's not out of the norm for me, that's for sure. But I mixed them particularly stronger this time around, and the main reason why I did that is because I knew that those two burl pieces were tapered, and I was really trying to limit how much ghosting you would see of the wood in relationship to the vase when it was done. So that was one of the reasons why I mixed the colors so strong. Because the colors are so strong, the camera was having a hard time giving you true colors, and you'll notice that sometimes the footage may look a little yellowy, and I've done my best to go into my editing software here to eliminate that, but just couldn't be done. Did end up having a fair bit of gold left on the very top part of the surface. I did debate on leaving it on there, but in the end I figured it was probably best to just get rid of that because, you know, I wanted wood essentially on the top of this and not resin on the top. It ends up being resin and wood, but you know what I mean. So as per normal, I did not have a clear-cut plan when I mounted this piece on the lathe. could have maybe used a larger spacer on the inside of this so that I didn't use up so much resin. But, you know, I didn't really want, if I didn't use enough resin, then I wouldn't have got the thermal cracking that I was looking for. So that's kind of one concern. And, you know, if you're relatively new here, the way my left-handed brain works, I'd throw these pieces on the lathe and just basically let them speak to me. I didn't really have much of a design in my head, really. It wasn't until I started cutting in the bottom and the top, and of course the base will get smaller, but you know, once I started cutting into the where the top's going to be and the bottom, I was like, okay, I see what I want to do right now. So my main concern was there are still some cracks at the very top of this vase, which really surprised me when I expose them, but and ends up not being a big deal in the end. I do throw some CA glue in them to keep them from migrating, but they do get turned away and they're a non-issue. Anyway, I'll just let you watch this for a little bit. I'll be back in a minute. Well, what do you think so far? I think this is going to be really awesome when it's done. I'm going to be going for basically a bulbous type shape in the center to showcase the resin. But up here, I don't know why these are here, but they're kind of all at the very top. There was lots of the gold on the top, but for whatever reason, it didn't go all the way in to crack. Hopefully that's not going to be the same case down here. But what I'm going to do is just use some Starbond thin just to fill these holes up and hopefully keep anything from migrating. And then I'll let that sit for a little while, then we'll get back to it. See you in a few minutes. The cracks that were at the very top that didn't get filled in were actually quite deep. I should have put the little extension tube on the thin CA glue when I was using it. But the only issue with that is if it goes in too deep, then chances are you might get sprayed with it. And I don't recommend that, especially if you wear glasses. It'll get all over your glasses. I've got a spot on mine actually right now. So I know that there's a lot of people that are probably curious about the workshop and new house that we're going to be building out east next spring. So we haven't heard back from the builder yet. So my wife and I are nervously waiting for that to come in. And I will probably show you, I'll probably share the cost of the workshop with you and basically the budget for that. But I don't know about the house. Probably won't do that. But anyway, it'll give you an idea of what it would cost to put up a fairly large workshop. And as it stands right now, it's 36 by 50 with a 12-foot carport on one side. And that way I can park my tractor out of the elements. And then if I need to work on it, I've got a place to work on it as well. As far as moving my equipment is concerned, and my shop and drying shed, the plan is to buy a 20-foot sea container, and I will fill that, and I'll put as much workshop equipment in that as I can. I'm a little limited by weight. I think they said I can put 10 tons in it, which probably would be the majority of my shop equipment and the contents of my drying shed. But I've got a fairly large industrial scale, so I'll weigh all that before it goes in there to make sure that it's not overloaded when they come to pick it up, because that would definitely be a bad thing. But you know, this is far into the future. Well, it isn't. It isn't. It isn't. If our house sells early, then of course we may have to pack up and move early. But we're hoping for door-to-door move. That may not be realistic, but that's the latest on the workshop. We're still in a holding pattern, waiting for the builder to get back to us. So the reason why I put the tenon on the top of this piece is so that I could reverse it, clean off the bottom, and then get a glue block on it like I like to do. There was enough material there that wasn't an issue, and I wasn't basically robbing anything from the vase to reverse it like this. So I just had a hard time. I was trying to line up the base as best I can. So that's what I'm kind of doing there. And then eventually it runs relatively true so that we can clean off the bottom of this and then get the glue block on it. I still get asked very regularly why I use tenons and not mortises, and mortises have a tendency to fail, and you can't put the clamping force on an internal mortise on a piece like this like you can on a tenon. So that's why I prefer to use tenons like this and not mortises. Now that we've got this reversed, of course you want to clean up any of the surface, make sure that the piece is running true. We're going to be using the hollowing system to take out the inside of this vase. This thing is just way too deep to even think about doing this by hand. By truing this up, you'll take the vibration for the most part out of this. And if you didn't catch the speed, it was 1050 is what I'm turning at right now. So, you know, before I'm going to be putting a steady rest on here to hold this. So you definitely need to true it up before that happens. But, you know, do yourself a favor, true this piece up before you proceed to take out the inside, because it will run smoother with less vibration. Now that I've got the steady rest in place, we can go ahead and take out the inside of this with the Forstner bit. So I started with 1 3/8, and then I step it up to 2 1/8. See right there, and I just stay with this one all the way to the bottom where I want it to go to anyway. Don't even think about doing this without having a steady rest in place with the overhang of this hanging off the chuck and the headstock. Any little catch probably would have either broke the tenon or anyway delaminated it from the piece. We are all set up and ready for hollowing. This is the one-way captive system. I have not had a chance to modify the laser rig yet due to holidays and getting videos done before we went on holidays. We're going to be using the teardrop cutter, and this is the largest boring bar that comes with the system. I think we should be able to use this throughout the whole, taking out the inside of this. And of course, got the steady rest in. All right, let's do it. So as far as taking out the inside of this, this was actually very nice to do because I was working with a large opening and not a small little opening like I do with most of the hollow forms that I do. The burl on the base and on the top wasn't exactly in the best shape. So I will do a resin finish on this, and it's going to take probably 3 coats to make sure that everything is filled in nicely, of course, to my standards anyway. But there are some issues coming up, but I won't spoil it for you, and you'll see how I deal with those issues. I'm still actually getting a fair bit of messages of people worrying about us and the forest fires that are going on here in Ontario, well, all through Canada really. Right now, British Columbia is really bad. I believe the fires in Quebec are still really bad, and of course we still got fires going on here in Ontario as well. There is nothing in our area, so thank you for your concern. We've actually had a decent amount of rainfall, although they are calling for thunderstorms today, and thunderstorms are certainly not something that we need to start any more fires. That's for sure. And you know, talking to our builder, he thinks that lumber prices are actually on the rise, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And you know, he thinks that one of the reasons is because people that produce lumber, they're using the excuse to put the price up because of all the forest that we've lost here due to the forest fires and you know, whatever the future consequences of that is. If you're not familiar with Canada, we have a lot of forest, and I don't really see that as an excuse to put up the price of lumber. I'm certainly not an expert in that category, but all I know is when we're driving through New Brunswick for 3 hours straight, all you were looking at was woods as you're going to the northern part of New Brunswick on our way home here. And you know, New Brunswick is a small province compared to Quebec. In Ontario, it's virtually nothing. So anyway, it is what it is. I don't know what the future will hold. I just hope that lumber prices are reasonable next year, and that hopefully the cost of building will come down to make it more affordable for not just us, but everybody else that's trying to build a new house. Well, that's not any good. Anyway, the glue joint failed, and now you can see massive tear out there. Got a bad catch. I don't know why it caught, but it did. But now the back of this is free. First time that glue joint has failed in a very, very long time. So now I got to take it off of here, re-glue it, and re-true it. This is not looking good as far as having this done for Friday. I might get lucky and be able to stick this back in its original position. I guess I'll take a lot lighter cuts. I don't know. It's probably not going to be true on the outside, so I'll have to do that. Man, I really like this piece. I think I'm just going to use the glue gun, lay down some beads, and then hopefully I'll be able to stick this down and kind of anchor it where it was before. To be perfectly honest, I rarely have to deal with this. It wasn't until I was reviewing the footage that I actually seen what caused this. And if that boring bar hadn't slipped off of that small tool rest, this never would have happened. So it's important to clear away all the glue so that when it goes back in the chuck, it runs true-ish. Hopefully that's enough for it to stay on there. Even if you've got that tenon perfectly back where it was before, it's highly unlikely that this is going to run true. So my workaround with that is to put it in the chuck, don't tighten it down fully, and then move the wheels on the steady rest until the top of the vase is running true-ish, or as close as you can. And then once that's done, tighten down the chuck. Well, we'll try it. I'm not overly optimistic. Do gotta check this. So right down in the bottom of that hole, I've still got that, so fingers crossed. I know that that looks like a lot of thickness to work with, but by the time you true up the inside again and you true up the outside again, the vase could be getting thin in certain areas. So, you know, when you put this back in the chuck, you got to try and make sure that this is running as true as possible before you proceed to turning. This ends up being a non-issue, but, you know, when that tenon failed, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, this is one of the nicest things I've ever made, and I'm just very lucky that I had the steady rest in place when I was doing this, or else this would have gone flying across the shop and probably broke into 100 pieces. So if you don't have a steady rest, I definitely recommend getting one. So how could this have been avoided? Well, you can use a tool rest like I'm using there. That one probably would give me almost the same support as the flat tool rest that I was using. But what I should have done was move the banjo, and the banjo is the piece that holds the tool rest. Move it basically forward or to the right as you're looking at this, and then turn the flat tool rest back towards the left, and then that would have given me a greater space for the tool to glide on. Lessons learned. Finally, on to sanding, I'm going to start with 60 grit, and then from here I'm only going to go to 220 on the inside of this because of the resin coating. I didn't see the point of even going any higher than that, and that's just an extension. You can get them virtually anywhere. This one came from Princess Auto here in Canada, and I think Lee Valley sells them as well, but any wood turning supply place, you should be able to get them there. I do find when you sand with that long extension that it's hard to sometimes get the feedback from that to let you know if you've got any lumps in there. So by using the sandpaper by hand, that'll flatten things, and then you can proceed to power sand. Now the problem I've got here is the steady rest is in my way for shaping the outside of this and doing any sanding. So I had to basically support the outside of the vase. I've got all kinds of these little adapters. Once you do this for a while, you'll end up with a bunch of them, and you know, they just sit on the shelf on my lathe. So I didn't even have to make that one because I'd used it for a previous project. I will say that these adapters that I make, or these little support pieces, they're actually made from pine. And of course, pine is soft, so when it's being shoved into a piece like this, it won't mar the surface of the piece you're working on. So I do recommend using softwoods in that regard. Certainly never for your tenons, but for this piece it works actually quite nicely. The steady rest was an issue as far as trying to shape the piece and sand the piece, mostly sand the piece. I was able to stick my arm through the steady rest, but I'll have to eventually take the steady rest off of there and get it out of the way. That way when I'm power sanding, it's not an issue. Just like on the inside, the outside was sanded from 60 to 220, and it's right about here that I realize I'm not going to be able to get the drill in there to sand like I want to. So the steady rest has got to come off the lathe, I was happy to see that when that support piece went in the top of the vase that it was still running true after that, because I was like, man, I don't know if I want to take that off there. But anyway, it all worked out. So this was a challenging piece to do, very rewarding, and I hope that others have learned from, well, what can go wrong and how to correct things when they do go wrong. All right, so finally finishing. This is 6 ounces of the Pro Series. I'm going to do a resin finish inside and out. There are some punky areas. I'm expecting this to take 2, maybe even 3 coats. So anyway, instead of trying to brush it on when it's on the lathe on the inside, I figured that I would just pour probably half of this, and that should be enough. Swish it around and dump it out. And there's essentially the first coat on the inside. Now I'm just going to see if I can pull some of that out onto the edge here. And I'm using a silicone brush for the barbecue. This was suggested by some subscribers, and it works actually pretty darn fantastic. So highly recommend using this if you're doing any of these resin finishes. That way you won't have any bristles from a brush embedded in your finish. That's a good coat in there. Try and maybe get a little bit more out. This burl that's on the bottom of this has actually got quite a few little holes in it, so I'm going to try and fill those best I can with the brush. Loving those colors. Quite a few little cracks to fill in here. Well, all right, that's it. I'm going to let that rotate for probably a couple of hours, and then I'll come out and shut it off. And we'll see you tomorrow. I'm sure there's going to be another coat. It does look quite nice. I mean, I absolutely love this piece. I'll be doing more of these. The veining in it, I think, is what really makes this. This resin here is just the coolest ever. Little dry spot right there. Sometimes they're hard to see. There's more there. And there. You certainly can use your glove as well. Sometimes your finger is actually best to use in this case. Get the material on there and then flatten it with your finger. Some people wonder why I use the torch instead of a heat gun, and that's because the heat gun has a tendency to blow all kinds of material onto your surface, and that's not good. So that's why I use the torch. I don't see any dry spots on the burl, but I do see lots of bubbles come to the surface, so we're definitely going to have to deal with that tomorrow. But man, let me know in the comments what you think about this beauty. Can't believe I almost lost it. All right, I'm just going to probably stick around for another 10 minutes or so, keep blowing some bubbles off with the torch, and we'll see you tomorrow. It is the next day. You can see in along the rim here, there's some dry spots. So we're going to need to sand this back and level it off, and hopefully there's enough epoxy in there that it's sealed off that wood so it's not going to bubble anymore. Yeah, this is really, I don't know, it might be one of my nicer pieces that I've ever made. I really like this. The inside of this too, with the, I'll try and show this, with the gold veining on the inside of this piece. Hold on a second here. The gold veining on the inside of this is really awesome. Try it. See it in there? Would have liked to seen more cracks, but you know, these are pretty darn spectacular. All right, let's get this on here, get it sanded up, and get our next coat of epoxy on. So when I'm doing these epoxy finishes, I like to actually use the next grit up. So this is 320. That's what I've used here to flatten any of the little bubbles that was left behind. There was a tiny little bit of runs here and there. I actually shut the lathe off at about the 2-hour mark. For the second coat, I let it run for about 2.5 hours, and that seemed to stop that. The shop is kind of on the cool side. I did turn the AC unit off so that it wasn't blowing air all over the surface of the piece. Anyway, once we get this sanded, we'll clean it off with some denatured alcohol, and we'll get the next coat of epoxy on. Alrighty, this is the second coat of the Pro Series. That's what it looks like if you want to get yourself some. So this time around, I'm not going to dump it inside. I'm going to brush it on. And it was a little heavy on the inside, so I don't think there's any need to do that this time. This is the same brush that I used yesterday. I cleaned it in acetone. If you're curious how I clean these brushes, actually I forgot it in the acetone overnight, and I thought maybe it might have eaten up the bristles on it, but it didn't. Cleaned it up nice though. Looks pretty good. Get the torch. Well, it looks pretty decent. Unfortunately, I can't take it off to show you. Anyway, I'm just going to keep doing this for about another 5 or 10 minutes. And then what I'm going to do is let it run on here. Use a big cardboard box like this over top of it, that way nothing can fall on it. And hopefully that's going to be it, because we are running out of time in a hurry. Might need another coat though. This wood is really I can see it still sucking up some of the epoxy, so I guess we'll find out tomorrow, and that's when we'll see you. Well, here we are. It's Thursday afternoon, and this still is going to require another coat, so I'm going to have to call the video there. What I will do is I will put another coat of finish on this. I'll also finish the bottom as well, and I'll embed it in next week's video somewhere. I'm not exactly sure, but this will give us a really good look at this piece. And I am absolutely in love with this. That resin is absolutely incredible. And it just goes to show you what you can do with epoxy that's about to expire, as long as you know it's going to thermal crack like this. And there's the inside. I know that didn't really show a whole lot of that. It is a beautiful, beautiful piece. Really like the use of the two cores. Absolutely stunning. And this piece is for sale. I will give you the sizes. I've got this written down here. So it is 8 3/8 inches tall, and that is 21 centimeters, and it's 6.5 inches wide at the very opening here at the top, and that is 16.5 centimeters. And it is a beauty. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you think about this. It is certainly one of my best. Don't forget to put designer epoxy down in the comments down below to be entered into the next giveaway at 100,000. And of course, I'll remind you about the deal that designer epoxy has on the go right now from 1 July to 1 September 2023. They are offering 10% off your order, free shipping within continental US and Canada, and 5 color packs. Unfortunately, you can't really choose the color packs. Gabriel just said it just would be too much to do so. But anyway, you'll get 5 color packs along with that deal. And I think that it's fantastic. And he tells me that there's a ton of people using the code InlayJim to get that. So, hey, if you haven't checked out Designer Epoxy, do that. And I can't see you not really wanting to buy more of it because it's an awesome product. Same thing goes for Hunter Tool Systems, sandpaper.ca, and of course Starbond Adhesives. All your discount codes are in the description down below, so go down there and check them out and put some money back in your pocket. I don't know what we're going to do next week. Getting back from holidays, this was really rushed. I would have ideally started this about 2 days sooner, and then of course it would have been ready, but hey, I got to take some time off here and there too. But anyway, thanks for watching the video. Please share my videos with your friends. And of course, we are sneaking closer and closer to that 100,000 subscriber count. So if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing that as well. And that thumbs up will always beat the analytics, or help with them anyway. All right, well, that's it. Take care, stay safe. Don't forget the bell. We'll see you next week.